It begins with the familiar voice of someone confidently offering advice, unaware of their own uncertainty and gaps in understanding. They speak with authority, framing conjecture as insight, while those around them nod politely or suppress quiet doubt. You may notice this pattern in colleagues, relatives, or even casual acquaintances who insist on guidance they themselves rarely apply. The voice carries conviction, masking hesitation and self-doubt, yet the suggestions often miss context, revealing a deeper tension between perception and reality. Even in moments of clarity, the advice persists, repeated with subtle urgency, creating an environment where certainty feels performative rather than informed. This is where ordinary interactions quietly distort perception, prompting reflection on the invisible rules that guide human social signaling. Behind the laughter or nodding agreement, there exists an instinctive resistance to vulnerability, where offering guidance functions as both armor and assertion. What seems like overconfidence is often a silent strategy to manage social uncertainty and maintain perceived control over others' judgment. And in noticing it in others, you may feel an uncomfortable recognition that this mechanism is not entirely foreign to your own behavior. These moments accumulate, hinting at a broader psychological pattern that underpins why advice can be so readily offered by those least equipped to give it. Human behavior often presents itself in contradictions, particularly when those who know the least speak with the most certainty. At first glance, this may appear as arrogance or ignorance, yet evolutionary psychologists suggest it functions as a subtle survival adaptation. Speaking confidently, even when uninformed, can reinforce social bonds, assert presence, and reduce perceived vulnerability in competitive environments. Behavioral scientist B.F. Skinner noted that reinforcement often occurs unconsciously, rewarding actions that increase social recognition or diminish perceived risk of exclusion. This pattern reveals a complex interplay between self-perception and outward performance, where claiming knowledge masks internal uncertainty. Neurological loops form through repeated social affirmation, making the act of advising habitual, often detached from actual competence or awareness. Cognitive dissonance quietly underpins this behavior, as individuals reconcile their limited understanding with the need to maintain a coherent self-image in public spaces. Attachment theory provides insight. Individuals may offer guidance as a means of seeking approval, testing relational stability, or asserting relational dominance. Even subtle gestures, tone, phrasing, or timing serve as protective signals, signaling confidence to reduce scrutiny or perceived threat from peers. In noticing this behavior, viewers might quietly recognize echoes of their own actions, moments where speaking up functioned less as insight and more as self-preservation. Over time, these patterns create a self-reinforcing system, where frequent assertion of advice becomes more about maintaining status than conveying accurate information. Socially, this manifests in office meetings, family discussions, or online forums, where the loudest guidance often comes from the least informed sources. The pattern operates beneath conscious awareness, blending instinct with learned social behaviors, and shaping interactions without obvious intention. Psychologists observe that this is rarely about malice. It is an adaptive mechanism, deeply rooted in human nature and shaped by context and experience. It is in these subtle, repeated behaviors that one begins to perceive the architecture of human social survival strategies. Where we once dismissed overconfident advice as folly, we begin to see the unconscious calculus guiding it. And as these observations accumulate, the narrative moves deeper toward the origins that anchor these patterns in early learning and evolutionary pressures. This forward pull hints at the next layer, where childhood, conditioning, and instinctive responses reveal the psychological foundations of this habitual behavior.
If you're still watching, you probably notice things most people miss. You question behavior, you look beneath the surface. If that sounds like you, subscribe. This channel was made for minds like yours.
From early childhood, humans begin mapping social hierarchies and testing boundaries, learning which behaviors secure approval and which invite criticism. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that offering advice, even prematurely, may have once signaled competence or confidence, traits valued in cooperative or competitive groups. Behavioral patterns form through repeated social reinforcement, where moments of assertive guidance are rewarded by attention, compliance, or avoidance of conflict. Attachment theory offers insight. Children who experienced inconsistent guidance often adapt by asserting control over interactions, claiming knowledge to regain a sense of stability. Fear responses also play a subtle role. Uncertainty triggers defensive behaviors, and confidently providing guidance functions as a mechanism to reduce perceived threat. Cognitive dissonance emerges as the individual reconciles incomplete understanding with the social imperative to appear capable and aligned with group norms. Neurological loops reinforce these behaviors, creating habitual pathways where speaking first, loudly, or decisively becomes a default response to ambiguous social situations. From early schooling to peer interactions, repeated affirmation of assertive speech patterns consolidates self-image tied to influence, regardless of accuracy. Behavioral science notes that humans often prioritize perceived competence over actual competence, rewarding the performance of knowledge more than its content. Social learning amplifies the effect. Children observe elders, siblings, and peers, internalizing the link between assertion and social acceptance, regardless of informational validity. Fear of rejection or marginalization subtly drives the compulsion to speak, creating a protective armor of apparent expertise. Even small successes, being heeded once, avoided once, or ignored without consequence, reinforce the habit, embedding it deeper into personality architecture. Evolutionary pressures favored rapid signaling of confidence, sometimes over reflection, because hesitation could be socially or materially costly. Psychologists observe that these early adaptations rarely fade. They evolve alongside life experiences, resurfacing in professional, personal, and digital interactions. The desire to be perceived as competent often outweighs the need for accuracy, creating a tension between social perception and internal knowledge. Over time, this produces a persistent, almost automatic tendency to offer guidance, even when uncertainty dominates understanding. Social norms further codify this pattern, rewarding confident communication with attention, deference, or temporary influence, regardless of correctness. What begins as a protective adaptation gradually solidifies into a recognizable behavioral pattern, familiar in both intimate and public settings. These origins illuminate why some individuals so readily give advice, exposing an interplay between instinctive survival strategies and learned social mechanisms. This foundation now prepares us to examine how these behaviors surface daily, shaping interactions in workplaces, families, and broader social environments. The next layer explores the social expression of this pattern, revealing its subtle influence on relationships and group dynamics. In offices, meetings often reward those who speak first, regardless of accuracy, giving early advice the illusion of authority and competence. Among friends, the pattern emerges when someone repeatedly asserts opinions during casual discussions, creating subtle social hierarchies through verbal dominance. Family dynamics reinforce the behavior. Younger siblings observing older siblings or parents may mimic confident speech to gain recognition or avoid dismissal. In classrooms or workshops, students who offer answers quickly are often noticed, praised, or deferred to, even when their understanding is incomplete or flawed. Workplace collaboration sometimes amplifies this. Team members equate assertiveness with leadership potential, favoring those who project certainty over those who pause to reflect. Behavioral science notes that social attention itself functions as a reward, reinforcing habitual advice giving even when it carries no practical value. Power dynamics in groups often favor those who speak confidently, with others subconsciously equating decisiveness with expertise, independent of actual knowledge. Neurological loops reinforce the reward. The brain associates social approval with assertive action, creating automatic responses to interject or guide conversation. Different people notice this pattern in different moments. Sharing observations sometimes helps others recognize it too. Even in casual environments, such as online forums or social media threads, early or confident contributions gain visibility, shaping perceived authority. Attachment styles subtly influence how individuals navigate these interactions, with those seeking approval more prone to offer unsolicited guidance. Cognitive dissonance arises as individuals reconcile internal uncertainty with external pressure to maintain a confident image, intensifying habitual advice-giving. Evolutionary psychology suggests these behaviors persist because projecting knowledge once increased survival or social integration, even at the cost of accuracy. Over time, repeated reinforcement across diverse contexts cements this as a recognizable behavioral pattern, evident to observers in multiple social settings. Ordinary interactions, lunch conversations, water cooler debates, casual planning, reveal the pattern quietly but consistently, shaping perceived competence hierarchies. The dynamic often goes unnoticed by the individuals themselves, who perceive social engagement as natural rather than performative. Even subtle praise or acknowledgement can strengthen the compulsion to provide guidance, regardless of the listener's actual reception or benefit. Social engineering principles exploit this tendency. Confident speakers are more likely to sway decisions, opinions, and group behavior subtly and repeatedly. Patterns that seem trivial in one interaction accumulate, influencing social credibility, influence, and the rhythm of group decision-making. This exploration of social expression sets the stage for understanding how modern life magnifies the behavior, revealing its rewards, costs, and deeper psychological resonance. In contemporary society, technology and social media amplify the reward for confident assertions, regardless of accuracy, creating a digital stage for habitual advice-giving. Algorithms prioritize engagement over expertise, subtly encouraging users to speak first, speak loudest, and appear certain to gain visibility and social validation. Viral posts, trending threads, and shared opinions reward clarity and decisiveness more than nuance, magnifying the impact of superficial authority on audiences. Behavioral science observes that instant feedback, likes, shares, comments, triggers neurological loops that reinforce habitual contributions, strengthening patterns established long before digital life existed. Cultural norms often equate decisiveness with leadership, shaping workplaces, political discourse, and social movements in ways that favor confident yet uninformed voices. Influencers and public figures frequently demonstrate this. Projection of certainty often outweighs depth of knowledge, subtly teaching observers that confidence can substitute for competence. Social engineering exploits these tendencies, leveraging cognitive shortcuts to manipulate opinion and behavior through the appearance of authority rather than actual insight. Evolutionary psychology suggests our brains evolved to value decisive action, a trait once adaptive for survival but now rewarded in abstract, symbolic environments. Human nature reinforces this. Individuals unconsciously imitate perceived authority, perpetuating patterns of advice-giving that may have no real foundation in understanding. Even casual interactions, amplified by group chat dynamics, comment threads, and discussion boards, normalize the behavior across scales previously unimaginable. Attachment theory offers insight. Those seeking validation or social belonging are particularly susceptible to performing certainty, reinforcing the cycle of confident advice-giving. Cognitive dissonance arises when individuals feel unsure internally but project certainty externally, creating a tension that modern amplification exacerbates daily. Neurological loops intensify as repeated engagement triggers dopamine release, embedding the behavior more deeply into subconscious decision-making and social performance. Small incentives, such as recognition or temporary attention, accumulate over time, subtly shaping reputations and perceived competence across personal and professional spheres. Behavioral patterns once context-specific now generalize, with social media, workplace hierarchies, and public discourse reinforcing the habit across disparate environments. The reward is often immediate, visible, and emotionally gratifying, masking the underlying cost of reliance on projection rather than genuine insight. Overexposure to amplified advice culture can distort social perception, making it difficult to distinguish between genuine expertise and confident assertion. Even well-intentioned individuals adopt the behavior unconsciously, participating in a feedback loop that normalizes projection over reflection. What looks harmless in casual interactions carries hidden consequences when scaled across digital platforms, and societal hierarchies. This modern amplification frames the stage for a deeper awareness of the behavior, revealing its pervasive influence on perception, judgment, and human interaction. Recognition of habitual advice giving leaves a quiet tension, as clarity exposes patterns without offering relief or a path to change. Understanding that confident assertions often substitute for knowledge creates discomfort, a subtle awareness that lingers beyond conscious observation. The mind notices repetition, the projection of certainty, and the social reinforcement that quietly guides behavior, yet solutions remain elusive. Awareness reveals that even careful observers unconsciously participate in perpetuating the behavior, reinforcing cycles they intellectually question. The human brain is wired to respond to signals of authority and decisiveness, a pattern embedded long before modern amplification existed. Even with insight, social structures, digital platforms, and everyday interactions continue to reward projection, creating a persistent friction between knowledge and action. Behavioral loops persist, showing that self-recognition does not equal correction. Neurological pathways reinforce patterns independently of conscious intent. Evolutionary pressures explain the origin, but modern environments magnify the consequences in subtle, often invisible ways. Individuals feel the tension of knowing yet acting, seeing patterns externally and internally, yet powerless to fully disengage. Attachment drives influence participation, as social validation continues to intertwine with projection and perceived competence. Cognitive dissonance creates discomfort when self-perception conflicts with observed behavior, an unresolved state quietly shaping interpersonal dynamics. Even observers aware of the mechanism are drawn into its subtle reinforcement, a testament to the persistence of adaptive patterns. Society rewards the appearance of confidence more than its substance, leaving a landscape where influence does not necessarily align with understanding. The mind simultaneously understands the distortion and participates in it, a dual awareness that can feel isolating and disorienting. Reflection lingers, recognition exposes patterns, yet the tension remains, a quiet acknowledgement of human nature's complexities and the subtle costs of certainty.